In 2014, the state of Oregon accused a ranch owner of building illegal dams that were killing trout and killing the plants along the banks. 1,000 structures without a single permit. And that was how the governor's advisor described it. The owner was fined. A few years later, trout came into those creeks on their own for the first time in recorded history, and the banks turned so green that you could see it from space. The dams had been built by a veterinarian who had spent his whole life treating cats and dogs, and he hauled the rock for them off his own hills. In the end, Oregon rewrote the law for him. Scott Campbell grew up in the town of Burns in eastern Oregon, where his grandparents ran cattle and his father was the only doctor for miles around. He left for the city, bought a single veterinary clinic in Portland, and over 20 years grew it into a chain of 750 clinics, then sold his share and came home. With that money, he bought a rundown ranch between Burns and John Day. He knew how to run something at scale, and now instead of clinics, he had 54 miles of dried-up creeks. Calling them creeks was a stretch, because what ran along the valley floor were ditches deeper than a man is tall, dry 11 months a year. And the last fish anyone saw here swam before any living person was born. This valley was stripped 3 times, and each time it lost something it needed. The beavers went first. In the 1820s, the Hudson's Bay Company gave the order to trap out every last beaver on all the land south of the Columbia River. The fur was almost beside the point. The British were fighting for the territory itself, and they figured that on empty land, American trappers would have nothing worth coming for. The beaver dams went with them. A beaver blocks a creek with sticks and mud, but the wall he builds leaks and water passes right through it. And then he keeps patching it for the rest of his life. For a creek, a dam like that works about the same way a speed bump works for a car. As long as those obstacles stand one after another, the water keeps slowing down, spreading sideways and dropping sand and gravel on the bottom, which keeps the channel wide and shallow. Once the obstacles were gone, the water ran straight through without a single stop. Fast water no longer leaves sand and gravel on the bottom. It carries them off instead, and the creek began cutting itself a deeper and deeper channel. The bed dropped year after year while the banks above it stood higher and higher. Water used to come out of the channel every spring and spread across the flat valley floor, but now it ran 6 feet below that ground and no longer reached it. Scientists call a channel like that incised. A rancher calls it a deep ditch. The plants along the banks went second. In the 1880s, there were so many cattle in eastern Oregon that they ate the willows and sedges off the banks. Those roots had held the soil in place, and without them, the banks started caving in after every hard storm. Fire went third. For a whole century, every fire here was put out, even though it was low fire that burned off the young shoots of drought-hardy trees. Western juniper came out of the rocky draws where it had sat for thousands of years and took over the flats. Today, 95 out of every 100 trees here are less than a century old, and a full-grown tree can drink a whole bathtub of water in a day. By 2007, the valley was getting as much rain and snow as it got 2 centuries earlier. But by July, none of that water was left. It used to be held by a chain of beaver dams standing one after another all the way up the creek. Trappers wiped out every beaver here in about 20 years, and after that, there was nothing left to hold the water in the valley. The obvious answer, given all that, is to bring the beavers back and let them handle the rest. In a nearby Oregon basin, they tried exactly that. 38 beavers were released in spots that by every calculation should have suited them, and researchers tracked where the animals ended up. Not one stayed. They scattered across the range, fewer than half were alive 4 months later, and in all that time, only 5 of them built dams. The problem was not the beavers, it was the job they were handed. A beaver needs shallow water to hide his lodge entrance under, and willows on the banks to eat and to build with. A bare ditch 6 feet deep gives him no food, no cover, and nothing to build with, so the animal leaves to look for a better place. A beaver will work for free and without a day off, but only at home, which meant the house had to be built first, and only then could anyone wait for a tenant. Campbell decided to do the beaver's work for them. If the animal will not move into an empty ditch, then a man will put the dams in and the animal will come to something ready. He was not trying to build a new river, he was simply putting obstacles in the water's way, right where a beaver would have put them. Ranch hands hauled rock, gravel, and juniper logs off the nearby hills and stacked them across the dry channel in low piles. Water hit a pile like that, lost its speed, and seeped on through the gaps between the stones, exactly the way it does in a real beaver dam. There was only one rule, and it was very simple. Every time the channel drops a foot, it is time to set the next pile. On the steep stretches that came out to more than 100 piles per mile. All of it was done by eye, with no engineers and no blueprints. Then the count of those piles ran into the hundreds, and that was when the trouble started. Under Oregon law, any work in the state's creeks and rivers requires a permit. The threshold is low. Move 4 loaded dump trucks of rock or dirt, and you already need one. Into one of his biggest piles, Campbell put about 80 dump truck loads, and all told the piles along the ranch's creeks came to around 1,000. He never got a permit for a single one. This was no longer a couple of rocks in a man's own ditch. It was a construction project across an entire valley. Permit rules exist for exactly these cases, and they protect the neighbors and the river itself. The U.S. Forest Service collected cases from across the West where structures like these did damage, and the list is a long one. Plugged road culverts, washed out roads, flooded hay meadows, fields turned into impassable mud, trees felled by beavers that the owners wanted to keep. What worried the agencies most was fish, because a dam across a creek can close off the route upstream to the places where they spawn. Beaver dams stood on these creeks for thousands of years, and the fish lived with them, but the law was written about the ones people build. In the summer of 2014, the Oregon governor's natural resources advisor wrote his boss a letter. About 1,000 dams had been built on the ranch. Not one permit had been issued, and nobody had even applied. According to the agencies, the work was blocking the red band trout's route and killing the plants along the banks. Then a law took effect that nobody had written for this case. A dry gully in eastern Oregon belongs to whoever owns the dirt under it. A creek that runs year-round and holds fish belongs to the state of Oregon. When Campbell started the work, you could walk the bottom of those channels almost all year, and there was nothing there to permit. When the state came out to inspect, water was running, and the rules came with the water. He had built with his own hands the thing that made his own work illegal. Those rules were written against people who wreck rivers, and the man they caught was restoring one. It all ended with a 9-page agreement. Campbell committed to filing a plan to fix any possible damage, and instead of the usual penalties, he paid $10,000 into the state school fund. The rock piles stayed right where they were. Each side in that argument was sure it was in the right. Campbell said he was healing the valley. The state said he was working in creeks without asking. What was needed was a witness that worked for neither side. The witness turned up in orbit. Landsat satellites have been photographing this country since the 80s, and 33 years of images add up to an unbroken record. Researchers picked 4 creeks on the ranch and compared 2 things: how green the valley was at the height of summer and how much water fell that year. The relationship used to be a straight line. A dry year meant a brown valley. After the rock piles went in, the valley stayed green even in a dry year, and that held on all 4 creeks. The rainfall was the same as it had always been. The water was simply staying in the ground far longer. These piles work nothing like an ordinary dam. A concrete dam works like a wall, with water standing on one side and dry ground on the other. A pile of rock works like a coarse strainer. The flow passes right through it, loses speed, and keeps going. While the water is moving slowly, it has time to sink down into the gravel of the valley floor. A small pond forms in front of the pile, and it looks like all the water that has been caught is sitting right there. But there is not much water in the pond. Far more of it soaks into the ground around it, and the whole stretch of the valley turns wet. Water used to leave here down the ditch in a few days, and now it stays in that ground for weeks and works its way back into the creek a little at a time. That is how any beaver pond works, and it worked that way here for thousands of years until the beavers were wiped out. The difference is about the same as the one between a rain gutter and a sponge. Rain that lands in a gutter is gone in 10 minutes. The same rain soaked into a sponge stays there for weeks and comes back out a little at a time. A valley with a ditch cut through it acts like a gutter and gives up all its water at once. A valley where the water has risen close to the surface acts like a sponge and gives it up all summer long. The sky over them is the same, the rain is the same, and by August the amount of water in them is not. From there, one change pulled the next one along. The slower the water moved, the more of it went into the ground. The wetter the ground got, the longer the grass held on that used to burn off in June. Live roots held the bank stopped caving in, and less soil went downstream. Fast water carries sand along with it, and slow water drops it. So sand started settling on the bottom in front of every rock pile. The bed of the creek began to rise, and the creek slowly filled in the very hole it had dug for itself. The river in the valley came back to life, but Campbell was after cattle pasture. He wanted grass that stays green into the fall and water his herd could reach in August. He got all of it. And in the summer of 2015, it turned out that something else had come back into the valley along with the water. Forest crews were burning off dry grass on their own ground, the way they do every year so that too much of it does not pile up. That time the fire got away from them and started spreading fast across the range. It burned more than 5,000 acres of sagebrush and dry grass, about the size of 4,000 football fields. From there, the fire moved down the slope toward the ranch, reached the Camp Creek Valley, and went out. The reason is simple. What burns is not the ground itself, it is what grows on it. On its way to the ranch, the fire ran across dry slopes where by August the grass had bleached out and caught from a single spark. In the Camp Creek Valley, the rock piles had been standing for many years. The water in the ground had come up, and the grass on that meadow stayed green into August. Green grass is full of water and simply will not catch. The flames reached the edge of the meadow and stopped. The wet meadow worked like a fire break a couple of miles long, even though Campbell had built his piles for something else entirely. Later, this was checked in other places as well. Emily Fairfax and Andrew Whittle took satellite images from 5 big wildfires in the western United States and compared riverbanks where beavers lived with banks that had none. Where beavers lived, about 3 times less of the greenery burned. So it was not luck on Campbell's part. It was the water itself that beavers and his rock piles hold in the ground. It saves a valley in exactly the hours when the flames are going past. A few years after that letter, the very red band trout that Campbell had been accused of harming showed up in Camp Creek and Hay Creek. They moved into the stretches where nobody had seen them before and where they were not listed in the agency's records, and nobody brought them there or released them. The agencies also checked their biggest fear, that rock dams keep fish from moving upstream. The experiment was run on a tributary of the Klamath River. Young salmon and trout were caught, tagged, and carried below the dams, and researchers watched to see whether they could make it back. The first ones showed up above the dams within a day and a half, and within 3 weeks, 9 out of 10 salmon and more than half the trout had made it up. Campbell paid the fine, but he did not stop there. Along with his supporters, he set out to change the law itself. The first attempt failed in 2015, the second in 2019, and the third made it to the governor's desk, where Kate Brown signed it in May 2021. From that day on, everything Campbell had been punished for was legal. Any landowner in Eastern Oregon can now stack rock piles like his with no permits and no fines. The rules are clear. The creek has to run nearly dry for at least 2 months of the year. The channel has to be cut into the ground more than 2 feet deep, and no healthy population of native migratory fish can have been there for 3 years. Only wood, dirt, and rock are allowed, and the pile has to stay low enough that high water spills over the top and out onto the old floodplain. In other words, the state legalized building exactly what the beavers built here 200 years ago. It also spelled out what to do when the fish come back, and now all you have to do is leave openings for them in the rock. The state will be checking the results for 10 years. Everyone in the program photographs their creeks regularly and sends the pictures in. And Oregon will draw its first conclusions by the end of 2027 and its final ones by 2032. Over about 15 years, Campbell built around 1,000 rock piles. Then the valley took over the work, and it had no more use for the man. The beavers came here on their own. Every summer, the young ones leave their parents and go looking for a place of their own. There was nowhere to live in these creeks before, and now there is everything they need. Water stands year-round, and willows have come up along the banks. From there, a beaver takes over someone else's structure as if it were his own. There is no need to rebuild a rock pile. It is enough to build it up on top and pack the gaps with sticks and mud. That is how a pile of rock becomes a real beaver dam, and the water behind it rises higher still. A beaver works at night and all his life. The sound of running water gets him moving, he heads for that sound, and he plugs the leak before it can wash out. Campbell stacked those piles once and never went back to them. From then on, the beavers maintain them. every single night without a day off, and they will keep doing it for as long as they live here. Stand today at the lower end of Camp Creek and you can see the line right there in the ground. On one side, there is dry, hard dirt and the gray skeletons of sagebrush. On the other side, your boot sinks into soft ground. Under the grass in August, you can hear water running and there are trout in it. One man brought this side back to life, and that is exactly what he was once fined for.